grab your wallet for a second and take a look inside. We tend to think of that money as just a simple medium of exchange, right? Just a really convenient way to buy groceries, pay the rent, grab a coffee. But what if I told you that the greenback is actually a massive, hidden geopolitical mechanism? Today in this explainer, we're unpacking the dollar throne, from currency to weapon. We're going to look at how the global financial system actually operates, less like some free, open market, and a lot more like the ultimate enforcer of a global empire. Okay, let's dive into this. Is the US dollar a simple currency, or is it literally the most effective military weapon ever designed? It's a pretty intense premise, but here's the thing. The dollar didn't conquer the world on its own. It took over through this wild combination of war, oil, and a financial network so deeply embedded in global trade that breaking free from it could literally collapse entire economies. To really grasp how we got to this point, we need to go back and look at exactly where the trap was first set.
Section 1. The setup. The golden anchor. All right, to understand the hidden machinery of power today, we've got to take a trip back to a quiet little resort in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire. The year is 1944. World War II is still raging, but 44 nations get together to try and figure out the future. Now, Europe is effectively bankrupt. Entire empires are collapsing. But America? America emerged not just victorious, but absolutely dominant. I mean, the U.S. controlled nearly half of the entire global GDP at that point. While Europe's factories were just rubble, American industrial production was off the charts. But here's the real kicker. The U.S. held roughly 2/3 of the world's official gold reserves. And back then, gold was everything. It was trust. So basically, America held all the cards. Given that massive leverage, the U.S. offered a deal. They said, hey, let's peg the dollar to gold at $35 an ounce, and then the rest of the world can just peg their currencies to the dollar. By tying paper to gold like this, the dollar officially became the global bridge. Now, it sounded totally stable and cooperative, right? But what it actually did was fundamentally make the United States the absolute center of the global financial system. Every single nation was suddenly forced to rely on American monetary policy, and they all had to start stockpiling dollars as their reserves.
Section 2. The pivot. Paper and oil. So, there was a massive structural flaw baked right into that Bretton Woods system. For the global economy to grow, it desperately needed dollars. But the only way to get those dollars out there was if the U.S. ran massive deficits, pumping cash abroad through foreign aid, military spending, and trade. Eventually, the math just stopped working. By the 1970s, dollars were flooding the planet, and foreign governments started to seriously doubt America actually had enough gold in the vault to back it all up. Under immense pressure, in 1971, President Nixon just closed the gold window. Boom! Overnight, the dollar was backed by absolutely nothing. Total chaos followed. By 1973, you had the OPEC oil embargoes sending energy prices to the moon. Global inflation spiked to double digits, and total panic set in. But then, in 1974, Washington pulled off this pivotal geopolitical masterstroke with Saudi Arabia, the world's largest oil exporter.
What's really interesting about this slide is how brilliantly this trap was designed. This agreement created what we now call the petrodollar loop. In exchange for American military protection and weapons, Saudi Arabia agreed to price its oil exclusively in US dollars, and the rest of OPEC quickly fell in line. Think about how genius this is. Step 1. Every country needs oil to survive, which means now every country needs dollars. Step 2. Global demand for this paper currency absolutely surges just so nations can keep their lights on. And Step 3. Those foreign nations took all their excess dollars and just reinvested them right back into US Treasury bonds. This effectively funded U.S. deficits and military dominance, all at incredibly low interest rates. Oil essentially replaced gold, and the U.S. military became the silent guarantor of the whole system.
Section 3. The weapon. Enforcement and economic warfare. Now, this shift completely changed the paradigm, because here's the reality. This level of financial dominance isn't just some natural free market phenomenon. It is actively and aggressively enforced. To understand the weapon, you really have to understand the battlefield. Think of this like the global plumbing of finance. Most international transactions have to clear through New York. The SWIFT payment system? Sure, it's based in Belgium, but it operates under incredibly heavy American influence. And because the U.S. controls this underlying infrastructure, the U.S. Treasury has this unparalleled power. They can freeze reserves, block transactions, and essentially cut an entire nation's economy completely off from the rest of the world. And when countries have tried to route around this plumbing, especially when it comes to energy markets, the historical consequences have been incredibly stark. In the year 2000, Saddam Hussein announced Iraq was going to start selling its oil in euros instead of dollars. By 2003, the U.S. invaded, and Iraqi oil was immediately priced in dollars again. In 2011, Libya's Muammar Gaddafi was pushing hard for a gold-backed currency to trade oil independently. That exact same year, NATO intervened, Gaddafi was overthrown, and those monetary ambitions just vanished. Meanwhile, Iran has repeatedly tried to trade its oil outside the dollar system, and they've been met with relentless economic warfare through massive, crippling sanctions. But perhaps the most dramatic display of this weapon happened very recently. $300 billion. Just take a second to process the sheer scale of that number. When Russia invaded Ukraine in 2022, the United States and its allies stepped in and instantly froze over $300 billion of Russian central bank reserves. That unprecedented move sent a massive shockwave across the globe. For countries watching from the sidelines, places like China, Saudi Arabia, and the whole BRICS bloc, this was an absolutely terrifying wake-up call. It proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that holding dollars doesn't just mean holding money. It means holding assets that can be politically weaponized and essentially zeroed out with a single keystroke in Washington. Section 4. The escape attempt. Cracks in the empire. So here's the paradox of dollar dominance. The more the U.S. flexes this power, the more incentive every other nation has to run away from it. And right now, they are actively running. China is aggressively pushing to trade oil in its own currency, the yuan, and they're setting up currency swap lines all over the globe. Even Saudi Arabia, literally the linchpin of the whole petrodollar system, is now openly discussing taking payments in currencies other than the dollar. The BRICS nations are actively exploring entirely alternative payment networks. And maybe the biggest tell of all, central banks worldwide are hoarding gold at the fastest pace we've seen in decades. And to be clear, they aren't buying physical gold because it's convenient for digital trade. They're buying it for pure sovereignty, because a bar of gold in your own vault cannot be frozen by an American keystroke. Section 5. The paradox. Why you should care. And this brilliantly illustrates the big question. Is the reign of the dollar actually over? Well, criticizing the dollar is super easy, but actually replacing it? That is incredibly difficult. When you stack the dollar up against its competitors, the dollar still has these massive network effects. It's like a giant puzzle where the more people use it, the more useful it actually becomes. It has the absolute deepest, most liquid financial markets on the planet, plus undeniable military backing. Meanwhile, look at the alternatives. They all have fatal flaws. The euro is fractured across a bunch of different sovereign states. The Chinese yuan is heavily controlled by the state, which completely kills global trust. And gold, while incredibly safe, is just totally impractical for modern high-speed digital trade. And because there just isn't a true viable competitor yet, the data really speaks for itself. Despite all the geopolitical resistance we just talked about, despite all the cracks in the system and the blatant weaponization of the plumbing, the US dollar still accounts for roughly 60% of all global foreign exchange reserves. It still sits very firmly on the global throne. But, history shows us pretty clearly that no reserve currency lasts forever. I mean, the British pound once ruled the entire world, and shockingly, after World War II, its dominance collapsed in barely a decade once global confidence shifted. If the dollar were to actually fall, the domestic stakes are just staggering. The U.S. government would suddenly face massive rising borrowing costs, completely unable to just export its debt to the rest of the world. We'd be looking at highly volatile inflation and a severely weakened purchasing power for everyday citizens. And for Europe, which is totally integrated into this dollar system, it would cause financial turbulence rippling aggressively across their banks and energy markets. It would absolutely devastate the everyday economy for all of us. Ultimately, the dollar's dominance wasn't built on force alone. It was this perfect storm of economic strength, institutional credibility, and sheer military power. But if you remove even one of those pillars, the whole system starts to shake. As global geopolitical tensions keep rising, the rest of the world is quietly, and in some cases not so quietly, preparing for the very real possibility that the era of one nation funding its global power with paper might actually come to an end. History has a funny habit of humbling empires that believe their dominance is permanent. So as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with this final thought. The real question isn't whether the dollar conquered the world, it's whether it can hold it. Thanks so much for joining me on this deep dive. Keep learning, and I'll catch you on the next explainer.